the two most powerful words that we speak, that we can speak as entrepreneurs. I am. And recently I had an entrepreneur tell me, I am not a great storyteller. That's what he told me before flying to Houston to tell his story. And anytime someone starts a sentence with those two words, I am, I start to pay very close attention to what comes next, because those two words reveal something deeper. They reveal identity, and our identity shapes everything. And as entrepreneurs, we create from our identity. We create from the internal story that we tell ourselves. It's something that we talked about in a recent episode titled, Are You Building a Bigger Business, or are you protecting a smaller identity? And in this conversation that I had with this entrepreneur about his, or lack of, storytelling ability, it reminded me of just how powerful our internal narrative can be. Because when this entrepreneur told me that I am not a good storyteller, I asked him if I could challenge that identity, not attack him, not attack who he was, but to expand who he could be, who he could become. Because if we're going to turn our lived experience into published wisdom, it's important that we just pause for a moment and explore the story behind our own story. So when he flew to Houston, we spent the entire day together in the studio. We were unpacking 20 plus years of entrepreneurial experience, of entrepreneurial wisdom. And we didn't have any slides. We didn't have any presentations. We just had a conversation. And that conversation actually started in the conference room next to me. We were on the vibe board, and I was going to just kind of map out and pattern match the experiences that he had. But very quickly, he opened up and he got real personal real fast. And that's where I called an audible. And I think by now Audrey has gotten used to my audibles. So she was able to flow with it. Her AQ, her adaptability quotient, has increased over the years. And so when I said, hey, can we just pause and get into the studio and just get the cameras rolling? Once again, he gave permission, but the permission came from a place of me thinking about his identity that he came to Houston with. And that identity was, I am not a good storyteller, because I knew if we started in the studio and we just had cameras rolling, he probably would have closed up. He would have clammed up. He would not have been as open if we just started with just the conversation that we did. Because when you create space to allow someone to open up, something powerful happens. And I think it happens unconsciously. This is where stories begin to surface. This is where the lessons that have been buried deep inside of us, like buried treasure, this is where those lessons begin to come out. And the lessons have a deeper meaning tied to them, because within the first hour, it became clear that there was something interesting happen. This entrepreneur who came to Houston with an identity of, I am not a good storyteller. Well, guess what happened? Within an hour, he is suddenly telling some of the most powerful stories that I've heard an entrepreneur tell in quite some time. And when those stories started pouring out, stories from his past, about his decisions, about his failures, about the lessons that he learned the hard way, I realized something very quickly. This entrepreneur's identity, that I am not a good storyteller, couldn't be anything further from the truth, because this entrepreneur was an incredible storyteller. And he was an incredible storyteller because he had an incredible story. However, the identity that he had assumed, I am not a good storyteller, that identity threatened to quietly suppress his wisdom, to silence his voice, and prevent him from sharing his own story. Because sometimes the identity that we assume, our identity, it is formed through comparison. Now, in this particular entrepreneur's case, he shared something that when he was growing up, there was someone in his life who he identified as an amazing storyteller. And this person, this storyteller to him, had a huge influence on him, going all the way back to, I think he said around the age of 5, 6, 7. He even told a story, I think it was around the age of 7, that has stuck with him now over the last 30 plus years. And somewhere along the way, this entrepreneur probably unconsciously started to compare himself to this person who had an impact on his life, this person who he identified as a great storyteller. And the thing is we all know this. When we compare ourselves to others, we know that comparison is the thief of joy. But I learned something through this experience with this entrepreneur. Comparison is not just a thief of joy. Comparison is also the thief of our own voice. Because the moment that we begin comparing ourselves to others, the moment that we become silent. And there was another moment in the studio that really stood out to me. At one point, he shared something about his past, his painful past, something that he was not proud of, some past experiences, and we had the cameras rolling. He asked me if we could take this part off the record. And of course, we're going to respect that, but this is where I'm going to come back and do some coaching and kindly challenge him once again, because what he shared in that moment was so powerful. And I even remember Audrey making a mention of, like, this is what was captivating her when it came to the story. That part of the story that he was sharing, that painful past, it was messy. But that messiness, that ugliness, if you will, was actually probably one of the most profound parts of his entire narrative. And without that context, everything else that he did as an entrepreneur didn't have the weight of the journey that he had taken. Because the greatest stories ever told, they follow 7 patterns. There are 7 archetypes. There are 7 different ways to tell a story. And that's a story for another day that we'll probably do on this podcast, just to give you some more context. But for this particular entrepreneur, there are 2 archetypes, 2 patterns that are becoming very clear. He has this story, he has this narrative of overcoming the monster, but he also, in conjunction with that, he has the story archetype, the story narrative of what is called voyage and return, the prodigal son, the story of redemption. And when entrepreneurs hide their painful past, or at least attempt to hide their painful past, something that I'm not going to allow them to do, and I'm not going to allow them to do this because those painful chapters are some of the most important chapters, because those chapters in their story often have some of the most profound wisdom that someone else needs to hear. And all of this comes back to identity, because you got to remember that this guy, he started the day with us with a spoken identity. He said this out loud, which then comes back to, it's like, what else is he saying? And what else are you saying that you're not saying out loud when you complete the sentence, I am? And for this individual, it was, I am not a good storyteller. But as the day unfolded, as we unpacked his experiences, it became clear that he had already gone through multiple identity upgrades. He was an operator who became a builder who became a leader. And now he's beginning to step into a whole new identity to become, at least what he believes he's becoming, is a thought leader. But that idea of a thought leader doesn't even resonate with me, because after facilitating 500 plus interviews at this point, I have discovered something very surprising, very interesting about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs rarely unlock their deepest wisdom alone. It always happens through a conversation. And even before recording this conversation with you, I was called out on this very thing, because I had spent about an hour just reflecting on this experience with this entrepreneur. And as I was coming into the studio to record, Audrey very quickly stopped me, paused me, and said, "You're being too analytical. You're being too logical." And I was speaking from my head. And so through some coaching with her, just like we coach other entrepreneurs, she helped get me out of my head and help me drop into my heart. And that's what I saw with this entrepreneur. And I've seen this happen time and time again in interview sessions. You can tell when someone is speaking from their head. And you can also feel the moment that they drop from their head into their heart, because when someone speaks from their heart, their words, they land differently. They carry a different resonate. They carry a different weight. They carry wisdom. Wisdom does not come from the head. Wisdom comes from the heart, which is why I told him something that I think surprised him. I said, dude, you are not a thought leader. You are a heart leader. And this idea of becoming a heart leader matters more than ever before, because we're living in a world where knowledge is, and will continue to be even more commoditized. AI can generate knowledge, quote unquote, instantly. But wisdom comes from lived experience, learned experience, shared experience, which is why when you publish your wisdom as an entrepreneur, your published wisdom will be your greatest asset, because there's no AI, no algorithm, no chatbot, no large language model. It's going to replicate the meaning that comes from the experiences that you have lived, which is why I want to ask you a question. What is the identity that you have assumed as an entrepreneur? What are the words that follow I am fill in the blank? Are you even consciously aware of the identity that you have been and are operating from right now at this moment? I was recently a guest on Ben Law's Max Life podcast, and we talked about an identity that he sees many entrepreneurs struggle with. And it's this one. I am not enough. And if I am being honest, I have operated from that identity before. I am not enough. Maybe you have been there as well. Maybe you're there right now. Maybe you feel like I am not enough. And you've been doing your thing for 10, 20, 30 years. But you keep doing your thing the way you've been doing your thing because you've been operating from a place of I am not enoughness. But what if that identity is the very thing that's holding you back from sharing your wisdom? Because your identity, as I talked about in that previous podcast about the internal narrative, your identity is going to influence your belief. Your influence is going to inspire your thoughts, and your thoughts are going to impact your emotions. And emotion is just energy in motion. So your identity is I am not enough. As a result, your beliefs might be that your experiences aren't enough, that your insights aren't big enough, that your story is not enough to share with someone else. But what if the opposite is true? What if the struggles that you have overcome as an entrepreneur are exactly what someone else needs to hear right now at this moment in time? So here's the thing I'd like you to do this week. I invite you to take action on. Take 5 minutes. Write down the identity that you have been operating from simply by finishing this sentence. Grab a pen, grab some paper, set a timer for 3, 4, 5 minutes, and just complete this sentence. I am fill in the blank. And you might find that you are operating from multiple identities, but they all kind of converge into one. And then ask yourself, this identity that you have been operating from, is this identity expanding your voice, or is it shrinking? Is this identity formed, as I mentioned before, from a place of comparison? Or is this your own identity? Is the identity that you picked up, is it something that you picked up from the experiences that you've had, from the expectations that other people have put upon you? Or is it the true identity that you have within you? The true I am. Because you're going to have to look at your identity, and is that identity expanding you, or is it shrinking your potential? Because if it's shrinking your potential and the impact that you can make, I invite you to rewrite it. To rewrite your story. Choose an identity, your true identity that aligns with the person that you are becoming. But even more deeply, choose the identity that aligns with the person that you are being called to become. Because the struggles that you have overcome, those struggles become the stories that give you the opportunity to teach someone else. The messes that you have made as an entrepreneur, and let me tell you, I've made a lot of messes. The messes that you have made, they become the message that inspires someone else. The tests that you have endured, they become your testimony that gives someone else hope who are going through the same trials and tribulations that you have once walked through. And the pain that you have experienced, or in my case, the pain that I've caused other people, that pain. We talked about this before with this entrepreneur who came to Houston and wanted to keep his pain off the record. Well, that pain, that becomes the platform that helps someone else level up. And when you begin sharing your wisdom, this is how you transform your past from being an anchor that holds you back into an asset that helps you build an even bigger future. That helps. And when you transform that pain from being an anchor that holds you back into an asset that helps you build an even bigger future, you're building an even future because you're helping others build an even bigger future by sharing your wisdom. Sometimes all it takes to unlock that wisdom is simply just having a conversation. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. If today's conversation resonated with you about how your identity influences you as an entrepreneur, and you're ready to start turning your past experiences into your greatest asset, head over to levelupbusiness.com, because your experiences, your story, was never meant to stay locked inside your head. They were meant to become published wisdom that helps someone else level up.